Mike Gallagher.
To quote the line from, is it The Sopranos? We live in interesting times, my friends. We live in interesting times. We live in crazy times. This is an insane summer, and it's only going to get more intense. I pick up the paper the other day, and I see Jonah Goldberg accuse Newt Gingrich of being Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain. You know, I coined a phrase a while ago for the Jonah Goldbergs of the world. They are hashtag Republicans for Hillary. They have to know that they're in her corner. Some of them come out and say it. Brett Stevens from the Wall Street Journal, for example, has said repeatedly that he wants Hillary Clinton to win big. He thinks that Trump needs to be defeated in a landslide in order to teach people like Newt Gingrich, I guess, and Mike Gallagher, and all the rest of us who are terrified of a Hillary Clinton presidency, a lesson. So let's welcome Neville Chamberlain himself, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. Newt, how have you been, sir?
Well, I've been doing good, and unfortunately, Goldberg has his history backwards, but we won't go into that many.
Well, I wanted Jonah on. I invited him. He and I had a bit of a dust-up a number of months ago because he can't believe that I'm supporting the Republican candidate, and he's a never-Trumper. He told my producer this past week, I said, why don't you come on, and love to have you come on even with Newt. He declined both coming on with you or just coming on with me.
Do you know what the greatest establishment attack on Churchill was in the 1930s?
Tell us.
Temperament.
Well,
Churchill was unpredictable. He, for example, supported Edward against abdication when Edward ended up wanting to marry an American divorcee, which violated his job as the head of the Church of England. He got involved in a big fight over the destruction of British textile mills in order to rebuild India, and he took the side of British workers. And again and again, Churchill, there's a fascinating book about Churchill in the 30s basically called A Study of Failure, because if he had died before 1940, he would have been remembered as this kind of very opportunistic politician who wrote interesting books and had a remarkable career, but never was quite stable. And so I accept the notion that Donald Trump has a temperament problem. Hillary Clinton has a policy, corruption, and dishonesty problem. You got to decide which of these is a greater problem. But that's really not what the Never-Trumpers are about. The Never-Trumpers represent an establishment which has failed. It failed economically. It failed in how it tried to solve the collapse of 2008. It failed in a 15-year war, which we are still not winning. It failed to reform Washington. So the Never-Trumpers represent a Republican establishment which has not had the ability to break through and get the job done. And this is much more about policy than it is about temperament. It's about a profound difference in how you see the world. And the Never-Trumpers represent people who, if the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, etc., were to go on for another 20 years, they're just, well, that life is like that, you know?
That's just the way it goes. That's the way the world works. I mean, I listen to these guys, and I know these guys, and many of them are my friends. There's no way they witness the steady drip, drip, drip of the email stories, this real bona fide scandal. Judicial Watch, again, gets more emails that weren't turned over from the State Department. They find out this diabolical connection between the Clinton Foundation and access that the State Department was giving. I mean, this stuff is profoundly corrupt, Newt, profoundly corrupt, and that they're fretting and clasping their chest and worried about whether Trump did or what he did or didn't mean when he said something about the Second Amendment yesterday at a rally in North Carolina.
Right, and in fact, having the anti-American father of the terrorists who killed 47 people in Orlando sit behind Hillary is not really a problem.
Yeah, not a big deal. Not a big deal. And of course, anybody gets to sit right behind a presidential candidate. That's not prime real estate or anything for somebody to go to a presidential rally, is it, Newt? You've been around. That just was a coincidence that the guy's sitting right behind her.
But what our listeners have to understand is this isn't a normal presidential campaign. This is a profound earthquake in which a vast majority of Republicans and a fair number of independents said during the primaries they wanted somebody who would break up the old order. And what you're seeing is, of course, that the Republican half of the old order has taken that message very seriously. And they don't particularly want to get broken up. They like their sinecures. They like their assumptions. They like the world that they helped create. And by the way, they're winning in that world. They all have good jobs. None of them understand the 25 million Americans who've dropped out of the middle class. None of them understand the cost of $360 billion a year of Chinese theft of intellectual property rights. And none of them are involved in the 3,400 people killed in Chicago since Barack Obama was sworn in. In his hometown, more Americans have been killed than were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan during the same period.
Newt Gingrich's latest book, Rediscovering God in America, he co-authored the book, and it's a fine, fine read, and I'm always grateful for the time you can give us. I want to go back for a moment, not to pick a feud, and again, a lot of these people are friends, and we just have a profound disagreement about who the next president should be. I guess the never-Trumpers think Hillary ought to be president, and they're perfectly comfortable with that. I want to ask you how you respond, since Jonah didn't want to come on the show. I would love your response to his accusation that you are, quote, throwing your conservative legacy in the garbage fire to make room for Donald Trump's agenda. How do you respond to that, Mr. Speaker?
Well, John Maynard Keynes was once asked if his opinion had changed, and he said yes. And they said, well, how could you change your opinion? And he said, well, the facts changed. What would you have done? Back as early as the spring of 2002, I was giving speeches saying that the State Department was undermining George W. Bush. In fact, got the president to be very mad at me because I took the State Department on so hard. As early as December of 2003, I said on Meet the Press and in Newsweek that under Ambassador Bremer, we had gone off the cliff in Iraq. So I think I've had a pretty long record here of trying to communicate. I've written books. Breakout would be one. To Save America is another. Real Change is a third. All of them arguing that the establishment we inherited has failed, that it is in fact destructive of America's future, that we need to profoundly rethink the entire system. And in that sense, I would argue that the new conservatism will be more populist and more change-oriented and much more cautious about the world than the conservatism that Jonah and Bill Kristol and others are trying to defend.
Newt, let's talk about this history-making year. A lot of people watch the Nealon, Paul Ryan congressional battle. Of course, Ryan was reelected pretty overwhelmingly, and yet a lot of credit was given to this businessman who, not unlike Trump, was mounting a sort of a populist campaign against the establishment. This year is going to have a profound impact for many, many years to come, and I don't think you can overstate that, can you?
No, I think that there are arguments that are just beginning that are going to go on for a very long time.
Right.
I also think that if Hillary does win, she'll be the most corrupt president in American history. Her foreign policy will be a total disaster. The economy will continue to decay, and her combination of Washington-based bureaucratic regulation and higher taxes will further crush the economy. So I would suspect 2018 would be a remarkably good year for Republicans if Hillary's the incumbent president. I mean, I think the underlying fault lines are real. The left cannot solve the problems of education, employment, and safety in Chicago or Baltimore or any of these great cities. Now, the Democrats can't solve the problem of dealing with immigration in a practical way. The Democrats can't deal with the kind of dangers that we're being presented by China, by Russia, and by Islamic supremacists. So none of these core arguments are going to go away. And people, and the fact is Wall Street's going to continue to be enormously powerful. The big banks are going to get bigger. They're going to surround themselves with lobbyists. They're going to pay, donate millions of dollars to politicians. And everybody else in the country is going to keep suffering. So you're going to get a Washington, Wall Street versus the rest of the country split. It's going to get deeper and bigger every year.
There is a very, very insidious story that's breaking, and I know this is dangerous territory, but I have to ask you about it. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have offered a $20,000 reward for information over the murder of a DNC staffer named Seth Rich. I don't know how closely you follow this story, Newt, but, July the 8th, a 27-year-old Democratic staffer named Seth Rich was shot dead in D.C., his wallet wasn't taken. His watch his phone wasn't taken. His watch wasn't taken. And yesterday, Julian Assange, in an interview with Dutch television, suggested that this 27-year-old was quite possibly the WikiLeaks DNC source. Now, is this something that you think has credibility? Is it worth talking about? Or do you think this is just a crazy conspiracy theory?
No. First of all, of course, it's worth talking about. And if Assange says he was the source, Assange may know. That's not complicated.
Right.
Whether it has any meaning in the presidential campaign, I don't know. But obviously, look, I'm old-fashioned. I think not only do Black lives matter, I think all American lives matter. And if somebody was gunned down in our national capital, we ought to have a pretty passionate interest in knowing why. And if it clearly wasn't a mugging and it wasn't for money, what was it for? So I think just in that sense, as you know, I've written 2 novels, Duplicity, about terrorism in the presidential campaign.
It's a great book.
This fall, the follow-on Treason is coming out.
Good.
And we have these kind of scenes in there where you begin to realize that there are dangerous things going on in the world. I think part of what happens to all of us, though, is there is so much clutter. I mean, it's a little bit like Hillary and the emails. There are so many different points of sickening corruption between Bill, the foundation, the Secretary of State's office, the emails. There's so much of it, you can't get it straight. I mean, it drowns.
It's information overload. It's so much you almost can't even compute it.
And of course, the news media actively tries to avoid helping. So
of course.
That's kind of where we're at.
Is there reason, final question, to stay optimistic? It seems like a very, as I call it, the summer of discontent. There's angst, there's conflict, there's drama, there's all this emotion.
This all depends on Donald Trump. If Trump, and it's not so much about the various mistakes, which he's going to make because he's an amateur making his first run for president. And his style is a wide open style. And when you do that, it's like a rollout quarterback who throws deep. You're occasionally going to throw interceptions. That's not the key. The key is, can he find his voice to be the Harry Truman of this generation? Harry Truman was so far behind in September of 1948 that Gallup quit polling. And Truman just pounded on Dewey and pounded on Dewey and pounded on Dewey. And in the end, he won the argument. And the country said, no, we're not going to elect Dewey. And they reelected Harry Truman. It's one of the most amazing campaigns in American history. Trump's only real path to success is to be aggressively who he really is and to raise the stakes. And he did a little bit of it, but he does it too passively. I mean, when 50 guys come out and sign a letter on national security, Trump should give an entire speech on their failures.
Right.
And say, of course they're against me, because they failed here, they failed here, they failed here, they failed here, and they're trying to protect the system that failed. And let the country understand this is a genuine choice between a profoundly different future and a decaying past.
You sound pretty optimistic to me, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I'm engaged. I look at reality. I look at the most recent Hillary leaks. I look at the terrorist father who's deeply anti-American sitting behind her. And I think at some point, despite the elite media, the country will connect the dots. And when they connect the dots, it will be a resounding rejection of the old order.
Get Newt's free newsletter, gingrichproductions.com, gingrichproductions.com. Newt, it's always great to hear your voice. All the best. We'll see you soon.